Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for making time to come on the podcast today and to also do this at the time encroaching on an important football match, or maybe not so important.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we've not come across each other yet. You're part of the latest GMAP cohort, so I'm very excited to connect with some of the newest generation of GMAPers.
Thank you. Likewise, I'm very happy to be here. And like I said, Mexico's already secured their spot in the round of 32, so I'm not missing anything yet. I'll catch the game as soon as we're done with this. So no worries at all, and happy to be here.
And I'm not going to ask you awkward questions around who you support more between the US and Mexico. We can leave politics out of this podcast as well.
That's okay. People wouldn't like my answer. I would upset a lot of people.
Let's not do that. Let's not do that. It's hard enough to get followers here. um, so when we were communicating to prepare this recording, I picked up a hint about teenage experiences that seem to have mattered to your life trajectory. And this topic is one that I'm always really interested in is
Sure. Well, I'll begin with I was born in Dallas, Texas, and my father's side of the family, both his parents were immigrants from Mexico. My mother's side was she's from Boston, and her grandparents were from Sicily. But the stronger cultural influence I had as a young child was the Mexican side of the family. I am the 11th of 14 grandchildren on the Mexican side of the family, and my father was the second of seven children. So there was a lot of big Mexican family. Um, when I was younger, every birthday party, there were about 30 people that would show up to every event. And I was very fortunate that on both sides of the family, I had excellent, excellent food growing up. And so I would say the biggest sights and smells and memories are of food, especially with my father's mother, my mamita, we called her. She would actually make a wonderful soup that I think if I smelled again, I would immediately, recall these vivid memories as a child of sitting at her dinner table eating this soup. But I would say that Mexican heritage I've reflected on a lot as I got older, and I always had an affinity, of course, for Latin American culture as a result growing up. And then in high school, I went to high school in Orlando, Florida. We ended up moving around a lot when I was a child. Uh, and in Orlando, through a very interesting series of events, my mother met a group of doctors and surgeons, healthcare workers that would go down to Ecuador and do surgeries on children with facial deformities, cleft lip, cleft palates. A lot of like what Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders would do, of course, similar missions. And because I was learning Spanish and I spoke decent Spanish for a high schooler who, even though I was part Mexican, I never fully spoke it growing up or anything, so I had to learn. We were able to go on one of these trips to Ecuador. First time I did it for a week in my junior year of high school, and then we ended up going back my senior year of high school to do this trip. And that for me was very foundational to, quite frankly, I was going to a very affluent high school in Florida, and that there wasn't a lot of exposure to other parts of the world, to developing nations. And for me, it was a very, very fundamental experience that shaped my worldview. I got to see this part of the world, and that further made me want to not only just work in Latin America, but do something that helped people as I got older. Very, very moving experience, of course, seeing a lot of people coming from abject poverty with a lot of medical issues that needed to be handled, and I'm eternally grateful, and I've always admired the many healthcare workers that donated their time and money and experience to help a lot of these people in need, and I was very humbled to be able to go on that trip. But that was very fundamental for me to see, and really influenced my decision to join the United States Coast Guard
hmm,
after high school. I wanted something different. As the kids say these days, I wanted to do something for the plot. That is to say, to make it interesting, to have stories, and it felt like a great way to uh, do something that mattered, get into an organization where I felt had a purpose, And not only that, I wanted to do something international. So that really fed that dream
Mhm.
of mine to do something international. I ended up doing international affairs as I major at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, which then fed into my career of doing international affairs.
And can you share a little bit about the people and the family members who shaped your values early on, including what drew them to do these health interventions in Latin America in the first place?
Yeah, it wasn't so much anyone in my family. I would say my mother, of course, and my father were very big proponents of traveling. I will say that they said, as young as you can, you should experience as much of the world as you can. It gets more difficult, of course, when you get married, have kids, have more life obligations and work. So they always were huge advocates for me to travel. My father um, he had traveled internationally extensively. He was actually a professional golfer back in the 80s and early 90s. My mother actually worked for the airlines, and so I was fortunate to have actually a bit of a means to travel as well, because we could, back in the 90s, you could fly standby fairly easily. And so that was always very helpful. Uh, as far as the healthcare interventions go, I think I always had an interest in medicine in one way or another, but I didn't want to be a doctor. But I really, of course, enjoyed the exposure to healthcare that was provided by doing that trip. I was mostly just moved by the fact that so many people were donating their time and experience to people that were less fortunate. Again, growing up in a very this affluent part of Orlando, this town at least, was you didn't see that so much. And I'm trying to be nice about it, of course, but I really felt a calling to do that, whether it was
Hmm.
healthcare or whether it was something else. So I enjoyed that a lot. I felt like I matured significantly as a result of those experiences, right? We saw people in very different situations. We went up into some very remote parts of the mountains in Ecuador, met people who only spoke Quechua, very, very ancient civilization uh, had influenced their life, and um, met many people who traveled for days and days and miles just to get some healthcare that they needed, because there were some fundamental things that I didn't know at the time. So as just a child, where, for instance, if a child is born with a cleft lip, they can't suckle, for instance, and they therefore can't get nutrients, and many of them will actually die very, very young as a result of malnourishment. So even just seeing some of that very harsh reality, and seeing these people go down to these remote areas to help people was very moving for me.
Hmm. And when you did these first trips as a teenager and you noticed that disparity in wealth, prosperity, access to health, education, and the contrast between the Florida that you knew, wealthy, lots of opportunities, and I guess teenagers worry about like scores at
Yeah.
sports and things like that, girlfriends, whatever. Um, what kind of worldview was emerging? Because it strikes me that at those ages, there's like, all right, like why is that? Like, whose fault is it? Or like, should we close our doors at home to like what worldview was emerging?
Yeah, and I think that's the word I was looking for was disparity. So thank you. And seeing that disparity, exactly what was that inspiration, because uh, the worldview that was emerging for me, and granted, I wasn't personally wealthy. I was very fortunate to go to this very affluent school, but it was this image of it's a world of haves and have-nots. You have this very wealthy echelon of people that, like you said, don't really think about much outside of their immediate circle, their first world problems, as we say. Um, but seeing the lengths that people had to go to and would go to for survival, for happiness, and seeing also what made people happy at a fundamental level. Uh, that was incredibly moving. There was, and this is going to sound very cliche, but it was one of the times we were down in Ecuador. I'll never forget. We brought there was an orphanage we would work with and bring some supplies to and toys. And I will never forget that this we gave this gift bag to a child, and I forget it had some stuff in it, some toys and whatnot. And the child was so excited because we gave them a bag, and they said, "Wow, a bag! Thank you." And we're like, "Oh no, there's stuff in it."
Wow.
It's like, "Oh my gosh!" And we're like, "Oh, just it sounds silly in a way, but it was for me at that young age, for where I was coming from, it was the experience I needed. It was a bit of a wake up call to the world and the disparities that a lot of people face.
Mm-hmm. And I'd love if we could zoom in a bit on your experience in the Coast Guard as well and the academy there. So how is it like? What, and maybe also what lessons stayed with you there
Hmm.
after maybe some of the technical elements faded away?
Yeah, the Coast Guard is interesting because it's a very different military service when it comes to the United States military. Of course, we think about how the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps, quite frankly, their job, to be very blunt about it, is lethality. It's killing. We have to kill an enemy who's doing XYZ. The Coast Guard, there is a national defense mission to it, of course, but it is still a military branch, but more importantly, it is a law enforcement and a humanitarian branch. And that really spoke to me as a person. I don't know when it hit me, but I kind of had this moment of, well, I don't really want to focus on how do I kill that person over there. I want to focus on how do I enforce a law to keep people safe and how do I rescue somebody, right? How do I save somebody on their worst day? Um, Especially when it came to the subject of immigration. The Coast Guard is the chief maritime immigration force that the United States has. And it was not lost on me when I was eventually on a ship down based in Florida, going down into the Caribbean, going down off of Haiti, off of Panama, off of Colombia. It was not lost on me that we would come across people that were essentially risking their lives to immigrate to another country, some cases the United States, of course, but they're risking their lives, quite frankly, to do it, especially as someone whose grandparents had immigrated from Mexico to the United States. It was a very poignant reminder of the humanity of it all and how people, no matter who you are, where you're from, deserve dignity and respect.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that struck me as well about your background. It seems that very early in your career, you had that opportunity to work internationally.
Yes.
And I'd love if you could share a little bit more as well about what surprised you when you started operating outside the US, and
Hmm.
if there's also a deployment or an experience that really fundamentally changed how you saw the world.
Certainly. So I was on a ship, as I mentioned, out of Florida. We were actually based out of Cape Canaveral, which was for me great because I was an hour from home
All
when I
right,
got
yeah.
stationed. Uh, and I was a deck watch officer, which meant I was the type of person that would be driving the ship, standing watch on the bridge of the ship. But I was also a law enforcement officer, and I had to go to a federal law enforcement training center to get certified for that. And I'll briefly note that to do that law enforcement training is 6 weeks. It's you do everything from learning how to make sure that small boats and people have enough life jackets to interdicting drugs and searching for drugs and everything in between. So it's a very comprehensive program. But I was very struck, in a good way, at the level of professionalism that was demanded from this program because they knew we are each going to go out there. We are going to be put in situations that are very, very different from anything we'd ever expected. And there was a certain requirement of you are expected to treat people with dignity and respect, even if you're putting them in handcuffs. You have to keep them safe, especially if you put them in handcuffs, because now if they go overboard, right, they're in handcuffs, they're going to drown. So it was a lot of making sure you understood the totality of the responsibility uh, that you were being given. And so a few months later, after I finished it, I went back to the ship, and we had a deployment down off of the north shore of Haiti, which was very common for my ship. And that generally meant we were waiting, quite frankly, for migrants to attempt to go from the North Shore of Haiti, usually to the Bahamas or to Florida. Uh, that is a very sobering experience because I'll never forget the first time that they said, "Okay, Chris, you're up. You're the first person." We had just come across, I want to say maybe a 10-meter boat, 30-foot boat, give or take, a Haitian sail freighter. If anyone's not familiar with it, it's a very rudimentary sailboat they would use for small cargo trips, just between small islands, very short distances. But what will happen a lot is they will overload them with people and attempt to make a run for the Bahamas. There's no electronics on board. They're just kind of moving as quickly as they can, and oftentimes they're moving into bad weather and they don't realize it, right? It's the Caribbean in the summer. A hurricane or a squall is 10 minutes away if you're not paying attention. And in one case, we came across a 30-foot boat, 10-meter boat, with the final count was 82 people on board. 82 people. And it's unfortunately not uncommon to come across that in the Coast Guard. And these are people who were, I think technically you can say that they were being trafficked as well. I think it was established that at least one person on board was a Haitian gang member that had collected money and was trying to, get them from A to B. Uh, and so you're dealing with a situation of human trafficking, but also of you have to be very careful. It's not like, oh, they're in a pickup truck on the Mexican border and we're going to take them and put them in a truck. We now have to extract them off of this heavily overloaded boat in what I would imagine, I think was about 6 foot seas. So we take our big ship, we launch our small boat, and I'm sort of wedged in the front of this small boat. I'm wearing a bulletproof vest, a gun, handcuffs, everything. I'm a law enforcement officer, and my job is with this Creole interpreter behind me shouting to go up, physically grab these people, and pull them from their boat onto ours, 2 or 3 people at a time, shuttle them to our larger ship, have them climb up a ladder, and did that back and forth for hours until we got all 82 people off. It took hours. It was exhausting. Took a few waves over the bow and I got soaking wet a couple times. Uh, but I'll never forget that evening. It was uh, again very very sobering because I couldn't help but think the entire time. This isn't the exact way that my grandparents came to the country, but it was the same level of seeking something better. And so this is the other reason that I get very very emotional, quite frankly, when we talk about immigration today, and the way certain people talk about it is it makes me very very sad. Having been somebody who is here because of immigration, but also somebody who has had to enforce U.S. immigration laws. There's a fine line you have to walk, but the way I did it and the way I was taught to do it, and the way I will forever advocate is to do it with respect for human life and human dignity.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing, and I mean, this is something that only people that who've dealt with immigrants firsthand know is you can't be neutral. Like it's you're literally physically handling people in probably one of their worst days of their life, and
Exactly.
it's probably either you have empathy or you probably need to shield yourself with hatred. But I cannot imagine anyone being just, oh, it's just another day. I'm neutral
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. And I'll point out, I was 23 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
23 years old doing this.
And you must
Uh,
have been carrying like women and kids as well, or was it just
yeah.
mostly men? Yeah.
No, men and women. I don't recall any children on this particular trip, but there are even more harrowing stories that I've heard from other people. There's a famous story of one of those boats. The ship came across it and the boat tipped because everyone was looking at the Coast Guard ship. And when you overload a boat like that, there's only a few inches of
Yeah.
freeboard,
Yeah.
which is but the water between the water and the edge of the boat, and it's not uncommon that they tip and sink. You just hope that if it does happen, the Coast Guard is there. We never will know how many people die at sea. Well, we'll never be able to know that, unfortunately. But there are several stories where the Coast Guard has witnessed it happen and people get in the water. Once people are in the water, there's a very, very short clock.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
you throw life jackets in, you have to do everything you can to fish them out and keep them safe.
And you mentioned you get very, very emotional about the immigration debate in the U.S. Is there anything you wanted to share on that topic in particular?
Oh, well,
And I realize it
just
can be
that
a huge can of worms, so
yeah,
I'm
it
leaving
is.
it open to you.
it is a huge can of worms, but I'll say this. I What we see on the news nowadays and these horrible interactions. I'm being kind when I say interactions with immigration and customs enforcement right now. I'm continually disturbed and absolutely sickened by some of that behavior. But by most of that behavior, it's not who we are as a country. It's not what we're taught. I can tell you exactly what we're taught at a federal law enforcement training center, and it's not the way things are supposed to be at all. We're a country of laws and dignity and respect, and that's what I learned the most in the Coast Guard is respect for yourself, respect for others, respect for your duties. Um, so when I see people abuse that because they're on a power trip, that that couldn't be a more evil thing to me. So I denounce it strongly, and I really hope that we as a country see the way again, the way of dignity and respect of others.
Mm. And you mentioned that part of the Coast Guard mission is also drug interdiction, and that's a
Yeah,
huge challenge at the moment given the
yeah.
massive drug consumption in the US.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's a bit more of a heavy-handed approach at the moment. Are there any reflections on that topic from a Coast Guard perspective in terms of how to solve this problem and whether kinetic options are viable?
Yeah, absolutely. I So one thing I didn't quite mention is that I spent a year on the ship, and that's unusual. It's usually a 2-year job. I left after a little over a year and got an opportunity to go down to Colombia. And so I actually lived for 3 months in Cartagena, Colombia.
Oh wow!
Uh, I did I'm trying to think of the English translation of it. It was an international maritime narcotics subject matter exchange, I guess, where I was the only American military officer there. It was about 20 or so of us from all different Caribbean and South American nations. Uh, Talking about counter narcotics and running through exercises and doing a whole bunch of training internationally. And that was, I think that was the first huge international affairs thing I got to do firsthand. And it was very tactical, it was very hands on. I made some amazing friends from around the world doing that. And we got to see the counter narcotics mission live on the ground in Colombia. It was fast. We got to crawl in those. If you've seen those drug submarines,
Hmm.
this was 2012, so this was still some of the earlier iterations of them. So we got to crawl in some of those confiscated drug submarines. They had some very intensive, of course, shooting range drills we were doing, some tactical drills we were doing, drug searches and seizure drills. They even did an exercise where they dumped us in Cartagena Harbor in the middle of the night, made us swim a mile to shore.
Oh
Again,
wow!
middle of the night, made us swim a mile to shore. I truly, by the way, thought I was going to die that night. That's the first time I ever was like, you dumped me in the ocean in the middle of the night, and I look a whole lot like a seal right now. And swam a mile to shore. And then when we got to shore, they actually had us crawl in a life raft, half of us in a life raft, half of us in the water, and we swapped every hour life raft water back and forth for about 26 hours, and they had
Whoa!
us just floating out there, hoping that we didn't get eaten, as just a survival drill, right? They wanted us like to just show us, hey, this is your survival at sea training and drill, and we're gonna put you through it. And yeah, 26 hours we were
Wow!
either in the water or in a life raft. But it was a very intense experience. But we got to see the value of this interagency cooperation, this collaboration.
Hmm.
We got to see how important it is to have early interdiction and early intervention. Uh, and of course, we learned a lot, in Colombia, right? We which is the main source of a lot of cocaine trafficking, of course. Um, at the time, the FARC was still active, so we learned a lot about how these, in this case, they're essentially like Marxist groups were trying to have this political revolution within Colombia, but they were funding their political revolution using cocaine money and drug trafficking. So they didn't so much care about the drugs as they care about the money for it to fund their political ideology. But I saw also, just the what people are willing to do to survive as well, because you also realize that most of the people that are smuggling drugs that we would pick up out in the ocean, driving those go fast and those pangas. Half of them are poor farmers or poor fishermen that are doing it just because they were either forced to or they were promised money to. So again, kind of going back to the just because you come across somebody in the middle of the ocean doesn't mean they're a criminal.
Mm,
Doesn't
mm,
mean that
mm,
they're a
mm.
bad person. So that was also a big perspective that I gained there.
Great. And I'd love if you could also share other international experiences. So I understand that you also worked offshore Liberia and also Saudi Arabia and Southeast
Yeah.
Asia. More from an international partnership standpoint, what maybe separates successful such partnerships from unsuccessful ones, and maybe what does America or Americans do well or when engaging internationally?
Yeah. So what you're alluding to is my job after that. I was very fortunate to go to what I always tell people is the best thing you've never heard of that the Coast Guard does, and that's the Coast Guard's International Training Division. I was with a unit called Mobile Training Branch. So the Coast Guard will both bring in international military personnel to train them at our own schools, and we will export training as well. So I was on the exportable training team, as we would say. So in 3 years at that unit, I went on 16 deployments to 12 different countries. I've got a list somewhere because I can't remember which ones off the top of my head. I have to look at the list. Uh, but we would go overseas and teach developing security forces. Usually they were Coast Guards, Navies, or Marine Police. How to do Coast Guard things, right? That could be law enforcement, everything from your basic handcuffing to shoot, don't shoot drills. We would do engine maintenance courses, port security courses, small boat tactical maneuvering courses, depending on what the country needed. And my favorite thing that we would do is when we would really get in deep with them, if we'd had lots of deployments with them, we would do like a train the trainer course or a curriculum development course. And I think this is one of the things that when we were successful, this was the best type of success we could have because we would go in, we had gotten to know these people so well. Maybe I had taught them a course and then I came back to do a train the trainer. Oh, you're doing great at this now. I'm going to watch you and teach you to teach your own people. And not only that, I'm going to spend a week here copy and pasting our training manuals to yours so that you can now develop your own autonomous training. And that's, I think, where we had some really tremendous success is when we teach a man to fish, sort of a
Mm,
parable
mm,
here.
mm,
It's
mm,
it's it's the best way to not only ensure the safety and security of these partners, but to also like help American security too, right? My ultimate goal was to help make the United States safer, of course, uh, and the best way to do that is if there's a bad actor out there and they're gonna, for instance, come from the Philippines, like through the Philippines to the United States in one way or another, well, the US wants to stop them as early in that process as possible. So if we build up our allies in the Philippines, if we teach them certain tactics and best practices, then we're going to stop a bad actor well before they come anywhere near us because our partners did it because they learned from us.
mm,
And
mm,
that's what I loved doing in that job. This wasn't my particular deployment, but we had a team that went to Ukraine years ago. Did an engineering class with the Ukrainians, and I can't help but think today that at least some of those folks
mm,
are
mm,
working on those drones and those boats. We taught the Malaysian Coast Guard how to do search and rescue patterns. And then 6 months later, Malaysian Flight 370 crashes in the ocean. And those are our guys on TV that we taught doing search and rescue patterns. And so we would really see
mm.
the fruits of our labor on a national or an international scale all the time. And that made us so happy and so proud. And it was truly a role where I felt like, we were helping to change the world for the better.
Yeah, thank you. And love if you could say maybe a few words about the Liberia deployment as well, because that sounds
Oh,
like it happened as well at a crucial time.
yeah, that was a funny one because and not there's nothing funny about Ebola, of course, but that was the situation that we found ourselves there was very interesting because it was weeks leading up to it. We know a deployment several weeks in advance for us, and I'm doing my prep as the team leader for it, and we said, hey, it looks like they're having some Ebola cases kind of out in the rural areas. What do we want to do about it? And it was just kind of well, CDC, State Department still say it's okay. We're gonna have you go anyway. And I said, okay, well, we'll keep an eye on it. And sure enough, we get there. We're teaching a course to the Liberian Defense Force on engine maintenance. Great. great bunch of students, by the way. I have an incredible amount of respect for the Liberian Defense Force personnel. They were some of the best students we actually ever had, and we would do um, a pre-test and a post-test to see how much they learned of this. And I think they had the best post-test scores I'd ever had on any team. So loved working with them because they were really there to absorb it and they wanted to do better for their organization. And so we're there, we're doing this course, and in a couple days, uh, all hell sort of breaks loose. They had cases in Monrovia, and that's where we are, of course. And if you're not familiar with Monrovia and the West Point region of the city, it is one of the poorest neighborhoods in the world. It's a truly destitute area, and we were flat out told don't go anywhere near it. Of course, we were kind of restricted to our hotel and the training site. And then, of course, when we started getting cases in the city, many of them were in that area, right? That's a lot of close quarters. People don't necessarily practice sanitary procedures, but we started to hear and see more cases happening around us. I think there was even one point where we were in the car driving between locations, and I saw a person taking another person's body in a wheelbarrow down the street, just like walking in front of like a market. And we could really see the situation deteriorating around us. Of course, my primary priority as the team leader for this group was to keep my own team safe, and we very quickly got an evacuation order from our team. However, as you know, that they were canceling flights very very quickly, uh, and so we had to do everything we can to get on the last flight possible. We accelerated our course. We wanted to make sure that this team that was there got the best that they could. We left them manuals, we left them tools, taught them how to do maintenance on these engines. We had to, of course, make sure that we were practicing the safest practices we could. We weren't allowed to have physical contact with. Normally, we'd have like lots of handshaking and thank you for everything you're doing, and that we all started just fist bumping. So, which was very funny later on when COVID happened and it was like, oh no, shaking hands, fist bumps only. I'm like, I've done this before. COVID was my second pandemic, but it was a very eye opening experience because we also came across a lot of just truly brave, phenomenal people that I will forever admire. I don't know their names, but I'll forever admire them. We at our hotel, we were eating dinner and we saw a like a safari vehicle out front. I say safari, like a vehicle out front that said Ebola response team on it. And I'm like, oh, are they here at our hotel to respond to Ebola, or are they just eating dinner? They're eating dinner, thankfully. And this one woman was, I believe she was the mayor of Monrovia, was one of the people there, and then a few of the people from the WHO that were also there. And they said that their job is simply to go to these rural areas and just frankly teach people sanitary procedures. And so they're going into these areas where the risk is incredibly high, exposing themselves to people who could possibly be infected to make sure that they are being as safe as possible. And because truly, they said the biggest villain in the Ebola outbreak is education, and I commend them forever for that, putting themselves at risk to teach others to protect themselves. We we were able to get out of Liberia quickly. We got probably the last flight out of the country. Um, there was apparently a bit of a panic back at Coast Guard headquarters that I found out after we got back home, because a Coast Guard admiral did not realize that there was a Coast Guard team in Liberia. And the phrase that my boss told me was that we had to peel the admiral off the ceiling when he found out your team was in Liberia during this time, to the point where this admiral considered diverting a U.S. military ship that was off the coast somewhere in Africa, diverting them to come up to the coast, take a small boat, run up to the pier, and have us jump in and drive out. They said if your flight didn't make it, if you didn't make that flight, we were going to evacuate you like a bunch of Navy SEALs. And we were like, I prefer Delta Comfort Plus, thank you very much, to a destroyer or something. Thank you.
Good to good to know that somebody had your back as well. But
Yeah.
one area I'd like to ask you about is it's always something that strikes me with people who take a military path in the US is how early they get exposed to leadership opportunities and
Oh.
Not the abstract PowerPoint type in the corporate world, but the real version of like leading young men into difficult spots and having to figure out how to inspire, how to guide, how to fix issues. So having had an opportunity to do that from a young age, I'd love if you could share a few insights of what you learned work well, what didn't work well, and how did you develop your style or your superpower, or how do you? If I had to ask one of your teammates to describe Chris, what would they say?
Yeah, that's actually a great one because what's very interesting about it, and this is a bit by design when it comes to the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, is that you're exposed to leadership, very, very tactical leadership immediately.
You call
As
it
you enter the
tactical, I
Coast
call it real.
Yeah, yeah. Like I mean it in every sense of the word, right? You're exposed to leadership immediately upon entry into the Coast Guard. But they make it very clear that the first step of being a leader, a good leader, is to know how to be a good follower. And they really sort of pound that into you. Because when you first start at the Coast Guard Academy, as you do at the other military academies, they call it different things. At the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, they call it Swab Summer. It's just a silly name that they have for the recruits. Swabs, the Naval Academy, West Point call it Plebe Summer. But when you are, this brand new recruit at the Coast Guard Academy, you are taught to be a follower. You are taught the best way to be a follower. You're taught to listen. You're taught to pay attention to detail. You're taught to move with a purpose. You are taught to understand, to confirm commands, all these sorts of minutia, quite frankly, that make a huge difference. Because then, when you become a leader, very, very quickly after that, you have certain expectations of people, and then you're able to guide people based on, oh, I know what was effective, how I was when I was a good follower. I did X, Y, and Z. So now that I'm a leader, I want to make sure that my followers, I was recently doing that. I want to make sure they know X, Y, and Z as well. And it's simple things like on a ship, when you're the deck watch officer, when you're in charge of the movements of the ship, you might say to the helmsman, left 10 degrees rudder. The helmsman is supposed to immediately respond back, left 10 degrees rudder aye, move the rudder left 10 degrees, and they go, sir, my rudder is left 10 degrees. And it's simple communication like that is, I would say, the foundation of all of this. So I, as a leader, need to make sure that I'm communicating clearly as a follower, because your role is going to switch. I might be a leader, I might be an officer on a ship, but I might not be the leader all the time. I might lead this situation, but then this person's going to lead. So I want to make sure sometimes I'm the leader, sometimes they're the leader, that I'm doing what I would want and they're doing what I would want as well. So fundamentally, you start with being a follower, but I would say as I developed, I sort of developed my own leadership philosophy that was based on, of course, the good examples and the bad examples, right? And I think I recently, actually for the GMAT program, ended up codifying my own leadership philosophy. And I always felt it was very, very important as a leader to set an example, proper example. And that means a lot of things. Of course, you want to make sure that you are certified, when it comes to actual certifications, but you want to also make sure that you have a certain level of respect from the team, right? You want to be somebody that the team respects as a leader. Usually that involves having experience in what they're doing. If I'm going to ask you to do something, I should know what that job is. I should know it well. I want to make sure that as a leader, I empower people properly as well. A true leader makes more leaders,
Mm.
to put it very, very
Mm.
simplistically. You should always be looking for ways to develop the people on your team. If I'm a leader and my team stays the exact same and stagnant for a really long time, then I'm not doing a good job developing the team and empowering them. There should be turnover. There should be people constantly promoting out of your team, doing better. I should have junior people striving for senior things when appropriate, all the time. But I also sort of tie that together with what I coin as lead with love. And I do mean that very, very sincerely, because if I don't think my leader cares about me as a person, I'm not doing anything for them. I'm not gonna, I might not even put in 100% effort. Ideally, you want people giving, lots of effort and enthusiastically supporting because they respect you. You show them respect. But I can say that I've been in plenty of situations where I did not feel my bosses had my back.
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt that, and I think a lot of people have their own version of that. And unfortunately, my first unit, that ship, I haven't really talked about this yet, but it was a very toxic leadership environment for me. Looking back on it, I will say I learned lots and lots and lots about what it means to be a good leader. And I think a lot of us know that you learn more from bad leaders than you do good leaders. But
Can you
leading with
characterize
love
what you
was,
meant by toxic leadership? Because it's a term
yeah,
that gets used quite freely, and I find it helpful if it's illustrated in a concrete way. And ironically, you say it was toxic, it was painful, but you learned the most from it.
absolutely. And I absolutely stand by that. So when I say toxic leadership, I think very specifically what I'll throw in is I can tell you that I was publicly humiliated by my own leadership on multiple occasions. Like in front of the crew, a senior officer to me made fun of me in a very, very disrespectful way, mocked me in front of the crew. And that is incredibly undermining, right? I'm supposed to be one of the other leaders, the leaders on this ship. I had this one person, senior to me, who wasn't even my direct boss, which made it even weirder. We're like, why are you picking on me? I don't even work for you. But publicly humiliate me on more than one occasion, publicly disrespect me on more than one occasion. And then, to be clear, his bosses, he was like the third in command of the ship, this person. The two people above him, the captain and the executive officer of the ship, saw it, didn't do anything. Even when I went to them and complained and said, hey, I can't, this person is harassing me. What do I do? And I got essentially, well, you need to suck it up. I'll talk to them, but you need to suck it up. Nothing changed. And so then I lost respect for that entire chain of command because when I'm being disrespected and undermined, my own leadership didn't care. In fact, they participated in it in one case. Um, and just in general, if I was having a personal issue or a family issue at home, there was no empathy. There was, hey, okay, well let's sit and talk about this. Is there anything we can do? Right, we don't have a lot of options. We're out in the middle of the ocean, but what can we do to help you communicate with home to help figure stuff out? Uh, and so that's the very very literal things that I dealt with in that experience, and it sucked quite frankly. You're literally alone all in the middle of the ocean, and you have no one and no friends. So I learned a lot of very horrible lessons that way, and I kind of vowed to myself to never let anyone else feel that way because of me. Granted, I haven't been out in the middle of the ocean in charge of a bunch of people in a long time, but when I went to the international affairs job, I tried to carry that with me where I wanted to make sure that I had, my role was clear and there was a certain line that wouldn't get crossed and if I could, but it was very important to me that I showed empathy to the people that I worked with. Because again, I was very young. I was in my mid 20s and I was in charge of people that were sometimes 10 years, 15 years my senior. But just because I have a 25-year-old kid and I don't have kids or a family doesn't mean I don't respect the fact that hey, oh my daughter's sick, I got to go do this. Like okay, well we'll get something to cover for you. Don't worry about it. You let me know if you need anything else. And it's simple things like that, right? And sometimes in the civilian world, as we say, some of that can be implicit because you like oh well that's HR laws that require me to do that or basic human empathy. But that's not always the case in the military. People have this tough mindset. This it's very very common for people to be sort of raised to not have any empathy, um, and to lead without empathy is not to lead. It is to command, and that's a recipe for absolute disaster.
Thank you. And I'd like to shift the conversation a bit to what you did after the Coast Guard. What
Yeah.
motivated the transition into the technology world, and also what have you learned about the relationship between technology companies and government institutions?
Yeah, so I when I got out in 2015, um, part of it was because I had a great time doing what I did that last unit. I really loved it, and it was very tough to leave. Sometimes it's a bit your choice, it's a bit not your choice when it comes to the military. But I got out, and I think a lot of veterans will tell you that the transition is incredibly difficult.
Mm-hmm.
You're raised with a certain mindset. I went to the Coast Guard Academy expecting that this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. I'm training to not be an ensign and a lieutenant. I'm training to be an admiral eventually. And to get out was a bit jarring. It's 2015 when I got out. I didn't really know what I was doing. You think you do. You think you're like, oh, I'm gonna start and work on my resume and get a job. And like, wait a minute, I haven't gotten a job yet. And okay, it's taking me a few more weeks. And then, God forbid, if you're having family things going on at the same time. I think for me, I when I was getting out of the military, I was dating a girl. She broke up with me right as I was getting out of the military. My parents were getting divorced at the same time, and so I was like, well, I have a lot to figure out. This is a very tumultuous time for me, and I have no job coming up. And so dealing with all that was very difficult. I ended up doing a sales job, it was a home remodeling sales job, just because it was something easy I could get. I did it for a year, made like no money, hated it. But I told myself a long time ago that even if I'm doing something I hate, I have to learn something from it. Otherwise, it was a complete waste. Right? If you have a bad experience, at least take something from it, right? So so that's how I was with that, and I learned a lot about home remodeling. So eventually, I owned a home, and I was like, ah. And quick side note, I got new windows in my house last year, and I called my old boss, and he gave me a discount. So shout out to Mike for helping me out with that. If he
You can
ever
put a
listens to
link
this,
to the
thanks.
company as well in
Yeah,
the show notes
thank
if you like.
thanks for the windows, Mike. Uh, but again, it's like you have to take a lesson from everything. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. We don't know how much time we have on this earth, so you got to make the best of it and take a step forward every day. Sometimes you also take 5 steps backwards that same day, but try to at least take 1 step forward every day. Did that job, didn't go well, but I am incredibly grateful to the many friends and family that I have that kind of helped push me when I was kind of down. Because that I did that job and I was like, what am I going to do? I just did a job and kind of sucked for a year. A buddy of mine said, your best bet right now for you to transition into the regular world, the civilian world, is to go get an MBA. So he convinced me, stop what you're doing with this job, go take the GMAT, go do some applications, and next year go do an MBA. And that's exactly what I did. I took a year off after that. I worked some side jobs. I worked the front desk at a gym. I substitute taught at a high school for a little bit, just some stuff for beer money, as they say. And um, went to the University of Florida to get an MBA. Had a great time there. Met some fantastic people that I'm very, very close with now. And when I was there, I kind of thought, okay, well, what's an industry that I want to get into that makes sense, right? That where is sometimes it's where's the money being poured into is your biggest indicator. But what do I want to do? What's helpful to learn? And I kind of said, well, big technology companies are still the thing. You learn a lot there. It's a great place to cut your teeth in the corporate world. Got a job at IBM doing sales originally. I've had to bounce around at IBM, which is very common for people. So I started in federal sales, and then COVID hit. So I said, okay, I got to get out of federal sales right now. No one wants to buy cloud. People want to figure out COVID. I ended up going to do internal strategy for IBM's consultancy. So I cut my teeth in the consulting world for 3 years. And again, it sucked, but I learned a lot. That's the life. If it sucks, you better learn something. And let's put it this way, I learned a whole lot from that job. Especially with that one, it was the inner workings of how large
Mm.
corporations function, right? It was quite very, very much how the sausage gets made, which is horrifying, of course. Shout out to Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Uh, but I I learned a lot about the types of decisions that are made at that senior level because this team that I was on was the internal strategy team. So internal
Oh,
IBM executives who have billion-dollar P&Ls, multi-billion-dollar P&Ls, are going to this internal team saying, hey, how do I take this part of IBM and get our growth trajectory here to compete with these two competitors? Where do I need to invest? What do I need to do? So there's a bit of financials. There's a bit of just general strategy and consulting strategy. And then if we're talking about SAP or we're talking about Adobe, so now I got to deep dive on each of those and understand how they work and how they operate, who their customers are. In one case, I did a federal strategy rehaul for IBM. And so that was huge too, because then I had to re-dive into the federal market and understand how governments function and contract so that I could then give recommendations. I even had to give recommendations on an acquisition that ended up happening.
mhm.
I was like, oh, am I going to get a cut of that? No? Okay, all right, I'll go back to my job. Thanks. It was like $1 billion acquisition, and I didn't realize at the time, but I was essentially doing some of the early math for it. So truthfully learned so much. Again, came across people who didn't lead with love, as I said, who didn't respect people as human beings, but again tried to take that lesson again and go on. I'm now at another part of IBM called Apptio, that but I do ecosystem management. So I manage partners, and at this point, I'm managing um, our partners in the public sector, but primarily U.S. federal space. So I'm kind of back into the U.S. federal zone a bit, but it's about relationship management. But the big thing with all of this is, at a fundamental level, I had to understand IBM's technology, not because I'm a technologist or a programmer or anything, quite the opposite. What I've learned to do is talk about the value of technology. You don't care how AI works necessarily. You do to a certain level. You don't care how cloud computing works, but you need to know why it's valuable to you. Especially if you're a CFO or a CEO, it's don't tell me how cloud computing works. Tell me why I should invest in it. Tell me why I should buy it. So I think what's missing a lot of times is the ability for people to translate technology or features into value, and that's where I've wanted to kind of apply it to a nexus of international affairs, because there's so many technology gaps at the international level. You talk about going all the way back to some of those disparities that we see with the haves and the have-nots, right? How do we bring technology at a fundamental level to people where it can do true good? I saw, for instance, examples a long time ago of people from IBM volunteering in Eastern Africa to use AI to map malaria outbreaks,
Mhm.
right? Like how, and therefore surge medicine to areas that it was expected to be needed in. So how do you use technology at a global scale to really do some good? Um, and that's what I've tried to internalize. That's the lesson I'm trying to take. Whether or not it's the lesson that's trying to be taught to me, that's the lesson I'm trying to take.
Fascinating how we come back a bit to the start of the conversation in terms of finding this compass that guides you back into service a little bit, how you started as well, and staying in that space of reflection. If I ask the people who know you best what they would say is your superpower, what would they say?
My wife would say that my superpower is her nightmare, and that's talking to strangers. Um, I quite literally last night I sat at a bar to watch another World Cup game. I was out of town last night and I was at a bar. I was like, oh, I'm gonna watch this game, and started off silently at that bar. Within 30 or 45 minutes, I am now best friends with the gentleman to my right and this woman to my left. I learned that she's from Colombia. She's a teacher. She just had Spanish at the local high school. This guy over here has traveled the world. And I was like, I expected a quiet night at a bar. And instead, I'm following this lady on Instagram and she's told me her son's life story. And I'm like, well, if people feel comfortable talking to me like that and kind of revealing a lot about themselves, that's I feel like that's got to be a good thing.
Is there a shadow side to that strength? You mentioned it's the horror of your wife somehow.
My wife is just she's much more introverted. She's a scientist. I'll tease her all day about it. My wife is a scientist. She does incredible work at a startup looking to that is currently in human trials, making a therapeutic for cystic fibrosis. So truly amazing work. But she'll tell you, she's like, no, I'm not the person that wants to talk to strangers in a bar.
And as we get to the end of our conversation, also wanted to ask, like, it seems that there are things that really stayed with you your whole life. This the values around service and doing good. Are there any beliefs about the world that may have changed actually over the last 20 years or so?
Uh, I unfortunately the beliefs are probably on the more pessimistic side, right? You
Mm.
always want to, you grow up believing people are inherently good, and you want to, and you still want to. And I think that there are a lot of places where that is true, but you also I've gotten an unfortunate realization of just truly how horrible people can be in some horrible aspects. But again, you try to use that to prepare, right? You try to use that to say, well, no matter what I do, remember, don't be naive about the threats that are out there. Try to be a good person and spread joy, but remember that there are bad things that can happen. So always stay prepared for that, and that's probably the way I've tried to. Unfortunately, I've learned that lesson
Mm.
firsthand in some cases, uh, but I think again, if you take a lesson from it, in how you treat other people, in how you prepare, and how you help other people, then that's good.
Thanks. Chris, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and we have this tradition at the end of the podcast of three quick-fire question and answers. So the first one is anything that you've read recently, book, article, or billboards that may have maybe changed the way you see the world.
Yeah, actually, it's right next to me. I went to the Arctic Circle Assembly back in October.
Wow.
Phenomenal experience up in
Wow.
Reykjavik. And I saw a gentleman named Tom Mustill talk about using AI to map whale communications.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely blew my mind. And then I bought his book immediately afterwards, and I read it over the
How
last
to
couple of months.
speak
But
whale.
his book, How to Speak Whale.
Right.
I'm telling you, folks, it's the nerdiest. It's so nerdy, but it's the combination of AI uh, and whales. You know, what else do you want?
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. And as you probably know by now, I'm really into rituals, habits, and life hacks. Is there one that you practice that has improved your life?
Ooh. Um, this is gonna sound funny, but like a lot of people, during COVID, I got into baking.
Okay. Sorry, I shouldn't
I
laugh,
got into
but
baking. I don't look like a baker, but I'll
no,
tell
you
you right
don't.
now, I
Well, what
have
does a baker
fully
look like,
embraced
actually? But
this. This is what bakers look like. They look like this guy with a high fade haircut. I got into baking uh, mostly because you know what the hell am I going to do for COVID, right? But it's evolved into now we're sourdough people. We say my wife and I are fully sourdough people. We have embraced our true millennial form.
is it a left-wing
Sourdough is
thing as
just
well, or no? Sorry.
I don't know. It's a I like carbohydrates, and I'm going to facilitate more carbohydrates into my mouth that are delicious. And you know, we always talk about in the U.S. I think in the U.S. everybody talks about how the bread is basically killing us. It's all the bread is always terrible, and so we're like, well, I love bread, but I always feel bloated and disgusting, and so we got into sourdough. Sorry, I say all this because baking, baking in of itself has taught me patience in a way. It's taught me to it's half following instructions, and then sometimes as you get good at it, you figure out how you can deviate. But there's a certain ritual to baking. There are certain processes and a certain precision that is required, and so that's been helpful for me as a person to do. And then of course it also results in me having bagels every morning.
Great. And last one is what's the first thing that comes to mind if I ask about a place that has a special significance for you?
That would be Portugal. Because my wife and I have been very fortunate enough that we've been able to go to Portugal several times and spend a lot of time over there. We spent several New Years over there, and when you're in Boston, Portugal is basically a 5 hour flight away. It's
Yeah.
actually closer to fly to Portugal for me than to fly to LA. So we've been to Portugal several times. Her father bought a condo over there too, so we've had a place to sort of like base. But we got engaged over there. We got married over there. We have had numerous trips with friends to Portugal. We've been to Madeira a few times as well, and so that's for me. That's a place that I've truly found a lot of joy and peace over there. So I'll always be very fond of it. So that's one of the teams I will support in the World Cup
Well, we're getting
as well
dangerously close
as a
to
result.
politically charged topics. But thank you
Yeah.
so much, Chris. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Likewise. Appreciate everything. Appreciate what you do. And I love the fact that you go out there and you tell people stories. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.